Hello, everybody. This is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium on Thursday, December 17th, 2015. Just a, pardon me, quick announcement. This will probably be our last news and views of 2015, given the fact that Christmas Eve falls on a Thursday, a week from today, and then New Year's Eve day falls on the following Thursday after that. So I might decide to do another news and views before the new year, but in all likelihood, this will be the last one for 2015. I want to thank everybody, web members, the people that have sent donations, prayers, articles. There's a lady a dear lady that made all this possible many years ago. I want to again thank her for all the support that has helped the website get up and running in the past few years. So Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy Hanukkah. I want to wish everybody a very good holiday season. Now, let's get right to it. There has been an interesting article on the Daily Bell, and I want to read this to you. I haven't cited from the Daily Bell in a long time, although I do check it regularly, and they had a rather interesting analysis about Saudi Arabia recently on their website. I'll be linking this for you on the recording. And you'll recall that I've been kind of suggesting over the last few weeks when the signals began to kind of shift. It was shortly before the Paris shootings that I kind of felt or detected kind of a rumbling in the background geopolitically regarding Saudi Arabia. And now it seems that other people are noticing the same thing. Now, the Daily Bell's article here is called "The House of Saud May Be in Danger of Falling," and they're responding to an article, an analysis that was put out by F. William Engdahl, another one of my very favorite researchers in this alternative field. And they come up with their own scenario, and I want to extrapolate a bit from that as well. And I'm going to be reading a sizable chunk of this article to you, the opening couple of paragraphs, a paragraph toward the middle and end. And I want you to listen very carefully to the kind of scenario that they suggest might have been taking place here all along. They start out by saying, quote, "Engdahl's article is persuasive even though we have a slightly different point of view. He believes that the Saudi regime is trying to control Middle East oil using military might. The regime intends to gain the ability to fully fix the price of the world's energy." Now, I can stop right there and suggest that this can't really be true, because for Saudi Arabia to do this, they'd have to control the oil reserves of Iran, which is unlikely they're ever going to do, particularly since Russia is such a heavy backer of Iran, and since you had the backing of the European powers in negotiating the deal with the United States over Iran's nuclear program. And then secondly, of course, we have all the energy reserves owned and controlled by Russia, and then finally the energy reserves owned and controlled by the United States, Great Britain, and British Petroleum, and so on and so forth. So this is very unlikely. At best, Saudi Arabia could influence the price of oil significantly. But let me continue with the Daily Bell at this point. Quote, "Engdahl also believes this process is underway and that the House of Saud has been successful in driving down the price of oil but overshot the price on the downside. In other words, oil has moved down far harder than the Saudis expected, leaving them in a precarious financial condition." Now, let me stop again there. I suspect that this was indeed something that Washington goaded Saudi Arabia into, but I don't suspect that the Saudis are completely the ones behind this sudden glut of oil and driving the price down. It could easily also be other oil producers, and I'm suspecting that the scenario may exist that the whole goal of this may have been to catch the Saudis in a vice grip here. But let's continue. "It certainly is true that the House of Saud is a main actor in the Middle East along with Turkey, because the regime has been radicalizing Muslims in the Middle East at Washington's request via fundamentalist Wahhabism. Thus, one way or another, many of the radical Islamic movements in the Middle East, such as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, are at least partially the invention of the Saudi regime, and I don't think anybody really disputes this. We wrote about that here. Engdahl's article provides us with further insight into the difficulties faced by the House of Saud. The reason the regime's situation is precarious is because, in addition to the regular costs of the Saudi welfare state, Saudi Arabia is now engaged on a war on two fronts. These wars are costly and show no signs of resolution on Saudi terms. In other words, Saudi Arabia has now committed itself politically. The reputation of the regime is at stake, and yet, and let's face it, it doesn't have the military strength to resolve these things on its own. So again, it's looking to me like Saudi Arabia may have been tricked into some of these wars and getting involved far beyond its ability to continue. And then it goes on, skipping about a paragraph or two here. It is perfectly feasible that this is a main goal of the Saudi regime. If so, it clearly shows how the relationship between the House of Saud and Washington has frayed. In fact, our thesis remains that Washington and the Anglosphere generally, that's their term for the Western power elite, is undermining the Saudis' control of oil via fracking and by actively encourage oil exploration and exploitation in areas other than the Middle East. When we combine Engdahl's insights with some other recent articles about the Middle East and Saudi Arabia, an alarming picture of the fragility of the House of Saud's military and economic position emerges. Skipping again here. Russia has emerged from the shadows as a resolute protector of the Assad regime and the guarantor of the Syrian people's right to choose their own leaders. If one accepts, as we do, that Saudi Arabia is behind ISIS-Daesh, then one must also accept the military reality that the House of Saud, so long an extremely cautious regime, is now engaged in a two-front war that it is losing. This is an astonishing development. In Yemen, as we have pointed out, the House of Saud is faced with millions of armed tribesmen united, for the most part, by anti-Saudi sentiments. Even the House of Saud's allies in Yemen, such as they are contemptuous of the regime itself, which is seen as corrupt and secular. And then all the way to the bottom of this article, the trap seems to be closing, and note that word, the trap seems to be closing on the House of Saud. Perhaps there are other entanglements that we do not see looking in from the outside. Perhaps Washington is still firmly an ally of the House of Saud, but we are sure that the Anglosphere wants to destabilize the dollar, and thus the interests of the of the Saud regime and the West banking establishment are diverging. This is perhaps the biggest story in the Middle East and an untold one. Now, please note what they're saying there. In order to destabilize the dollar and roll in a new financial system to replace the petrodollar, in order to roll this new financial system in, they have to go after the dollar, and the way to go after that dollar is to decouple Saudi Arabia and the United States and basically pressure the Saudi regime into a collapse or near collapse, which they can then step in and offer solutions, all right? And this is a classical thing that we have seen going on in history. Now, I suspect, quite frankly, that a lot of this may be true. I've suspected that Saudi Arabia may be on the menu for all the reasons that the Daily Bell has outlined. But I suspect that they're also on the menu simply because either they or the terrorist groups that they have been co-sponsoring with other intelligence agencies and vested interests may have overstepped their bounds somehow. I do get the feeling that the religious element is not out of the picture in this entirely, although this is the key right here. Now, I think there's something else you have to be aware of. When Russia stepped into the Syrian situation, this destabilized this plan. So I suspect that we're also going to have to look very carefully at the financial news now that's coming out of Moscow and Beijing in respect to the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, the Silk Road, and Russia's attempts to build up the infrastructure in Siberia. We've seen some significant but very quiet moves between Russia and Japan over the last couple of months. So this is one to watch as well. We're now kind of in I suspect, if the Daily Bell's reading of this situation is the same as mine, and it appears to be that Saudi Arabia is on the menu, I suspect that we're going to see some very, very significant shifts. I think we're going to see some significant contests now between the Anglosphere and the BRICS bloc, namely Russia and China, but also to a certain extent India and Japan. We're going to see some contests now as to what type of system each side wants to put into place. Russia in particular is one to watch very, very carefully in this regard because, again, I don't think that they're going to want to play ball completely. So anyway, that's it. I want to say again a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everybody out there. If I do get the urge to do a news and views sometime between Christmas and New Year, most likely look for it on a Tuesday or Wednesday before New Year's Eve. And again, that's it for news and views from the Nefarium. I'll see everybody on the flip side, and God bless.